Well, good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight for the USC Alumni Veterans Network program, Navigating the VA's Disability Rating Certification. It is my pleasure to introduce our featured guest, Joseph Sapien. He's an Army veteran with 11 years experience as a Veterans Affairs Officer. Joseph has guided veterans successfully through their disability benefits, processes, and recently was appointed by the United States Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Robert Leon Wilkie Jr., to be a member of the Veterans and Community Oversight and Engagement Board. So we are very excited to have him here tonight to share with our Trojan veterans community. Welcome, Joseph.
Hey guys, thank you. I appreciate it. So yeah, I guess we could just jump right into it, I guess so. And tonight we'll basically be talking about the basic parts of how to get service connected for compensation through the VA. And so basically what service connection compensation is, it's a monthly benefit that's tax-free for veterans who have a physical or mental health condition that could be linked to their service. The awards are based on the VA disability percentages that go from 0 to 10. And so you won't hear anybody that has like a 45 or 35%. It's 0, 10, 20, 30. And there's little steps in between. So at 0, you kind of get your foot in the door for healthcare through the VA, and you get your children the California College Fee Waiver. But then at 30%, you could add them as dependents and get a little extra money. At 50%, then you're pretty much entitled to your medical being taken care of, everything but dental. And then at 70%, you're entitled to get into the assisted living or the veterans homes if you need it. And then at the 100%, you start to get into like the benefits a lot of people want, especially a lot of you guys probably looking into the student loan forgiveness. And so this money, the service-connected compensation, is tax-free money. It's nobody's business. It's compensation. It's not income. Next slide. So this is kind of a basic way how they rate or how they pay people on the first of the month. But as you could see, this is 2014. Anytime you see Social Security get a little raise in the beginning of the year, then there's a good likelihood that the VA disability is going to go up too. So this is a little bit higher than what you see here for the 2014. Next slide. And so to be eligible for veterans disability, one, you want to show that you're a veteran. The biggest thing you need to show that you're a veteran is your DD-214. And there's different levels to when it comes to your discharge. So it's not just honorable or dishonorable. There's different levels. As long as you have something higher than other than dishonorable, you have a shot at some type of benefits for what you did in service. When you're trying to get service connected, you're trying to show the severity of the condition, not necessarily how many times you go to the hospital or how your medication got raised or something like that. You want to show the severity of it. So if your medication goes up, but it helps the condition, you might actually get a reduction. Next slide, please. So for service-connected disability, what you're trying to show is something happened to me in service, and that thing still bothers me today. So the major thing you need when you file a claim is having a current diagnosis to show that this thing is still bothering me. Then you want to show how that condition is due to your service. So most of the time you use your military records. Sometimes it'll be your unit records, or sometimes you'll lean on certain things like being deployed in your military occupation. There's little give-ins. So say you're a mechanic on a flight line working on aircraft, there's a high likelihood that guy would have hearing loss. Or if you're airborne, those people usually have bad knees, bad back, bad ankles. So it's kind of they kind of give you a little more leeway. When it comes to conditions that you could try to claim that are due to service, really it could be anything. The major thing that it can't be is due to your own fault. So if you got drunk and got in a wreck drunk driving, and even though you got injured, that's not going to work. But if you were driving on a weekend and a drunk driver hit you, even though you were off duty, it was a Saturday night, you could still claim those as disabilities because you were still an active duty member. Next slide. So again, when it comes to the disabilities, the major thing I tell my people all the time is get the current diagnosis. You could have a lot of records in service saying you hurt your back, but if you don't have anything now, they'll say, well, it can't be a problem. And that's where usually a lot of vets get irritated with the system, because they really do have a condition now, but a lot of people kind of avoid hospitals a lot. So then you don't have current records to back you. And it's the easiest way to get denied. People still are trying to use the disability benefit questionnaires. They're VA forms that your doctor fills out. The VA's been trying to knock those off lately. And I've always told my people, it's just better to get a doctor's letter. So plain and simple, it doesn't have to be 3-4 pages long. All it has to be is a doctor's letter saying, I've been treating this person, they are diagnosed with this condition, and due to this person's background and history, I believe this condition is more likely than not due to service. So the major thing is showing that letter saying more likely than not. Basically, is there a 51% chance? When it comes to the non-compensationable parts, basically they're things that happened to you before service or that you were born with. So if you're colorblind in some kind of way, that won't be considered a disability. If you had some kind of birth defect, but the military still accepted you in the service, won't necessarily be a VA disability that you could claim. So it kind of depends. But they use the personality disorder to kind of mess with people sometimes when they're getting a bad discharge. Next slide. Element 2, in-service injury or stressor, incurred or aggravated during military service. So let's say you were born colorblind. It would be hard to say that the military aggravated that condition and made it worse. But let's say you played high school football and injured your knee, but then you went and joined the infantry after you graduated. And after doing the infantry for a little while, you hurt your knee again, and now you needed surgery, or now you need to wear a brace where you didn't have to do it before. That you could say is an aggravated issue because the military was aware that you had it before your service, but the wear and tear on your body made it worse. And of course, it wasn't your own willful misconduct, which is usually doing the dumb stuff, being drunk, getting in fights, things like that. So long as it's not your fault and there's no record that it's your fault, you should be okay and you can file for it. Next slide. So for medical evidence, what you're trying to show is treat it like you're going to court. The VA kind of takes our word, but not really. It really comes down to what you can prove. And the major thing you can prove is your medical evidence. And so what you want to show is that you had a diagnosis during service or medical evidence of an illness. So if you have a lot of military records complaining about a lower back, even though there wasn't necessarily a diagnosis, you could show that you had these issues in service. Medical evidence of an illness during a presumptive period after service is when, once you get out of the service, You have 1 year to get diagnosed for anything that may be due to your service. So that's for a lot of us that know that when you're in service, you're not really supposed to be complaining about things and suck it up, drive on kind of deal. That's why the VA kind of gives you a year after you get out to get diagnosed and be treated for something. And if you're diagnosed with a condition within that year of your ETS date, you could kind of argue that it's due to your service. They will still try to argue with you a little bit on that sometimes. Lay evidence. So for certain circumstances like PTSD, the VA will want your personal story about how this thing is due to your service and what happened. Other circumstances are your friends, people that you served with that could witness and say, yeah, when I was deployed with them, I seen this happen and this is what happened to him. Or I'm related to this individual and every night they have these issues. So they could kind of use that type of lay evidence, but medical evidence is gold. Next slide. So the nexus is trying to connect the current disability with the in-service that you did. So you'll see this a lot with people that get irritated with the sleep apnea. They currently get diagnosed now and think they could file for it because they heard other people have done it. But they don't have a thing connecting it to service. They just have a thing saying that they're diagnosed now. So they file for it and the VA denies them, and now they're going into the appeals process. And so what you're trying to show is I do have this condition now, but it's because of my service, and it's because of my service because of this incident over here. So if you could tie that with your military records, whether they're unit records or your medical records, you should have a good shot. So when you're trying to establish service connection for disability, these are the 4 basic things. Number 1 is direct service connection. I jumped out of the Humvee and I broke my knee. Number 2, aggravation. I broke my wrist when I was skateboarding when I was 8 years old, but now that I'm a mechanic, I got carpal tunnel. You could argue that that was aggravation because of your job as a mechanic. Secondary service connection is for things the VA is already paying you for. So for example, let's say you're getting paid 10% or even 0% for your lower back. And now, 10 years later, you have knee problems. You could argue that because of your back, it's affecting your joints. So now my knees are messed up because of my bad back. So when you file a claim for something like that, you would file your knee condition secondary due to your service-connected lower back. A major thing there that I try to tell people is don't file for secondaries until you get the primaries service-connected, unless you got really good records. But most of the time I say get the primaries built first and then branch off to go to secondaries. And secondaries is where a lot of people could get the higher ratings for the things that they're getting for now. So if you're stuck at that 50, 60%, and you can't figure out how you could get more and you're trying to, secondaries is a safe bet. And the 4th one is the presumptive service connection. Presumptive service connection, a very common one for a lot of us would be Agent Orange with the Vietnam vets. Let's say you were in service in Vietnam, boots on the ground, or even now you could be a blue water vet and be at least within 12 miles. But let's say everybody in your family, no matter what, you know when you get older, you're going to get diabetes. Because diabetes is a presumptive condition due to Agent Orange, the moment you get diagnosed with diabetes, even if it's 40 years after you served, you can file it as a service connection and the VA will grant it due to the presumptive nature of that condition in your service. So it only happens for a few people and specific little things. So Gulf War illness is one of them. And when it comes to the Gulf War, undiagnosed Gulf War illness, don't get that confused in being not diagnosed. What they're saying there is that you weren't diagnosed in service. But now that you're diagnosed, you're trying to argue that it's due to the undiagnosed Gulf War illness that you had it this long. But don't try to file those things if you're not currently diagnosed. Next slide. Okay, so yeah, this is the theory for direct service connection. So what you're trying to do is prove that the current disability is directly linked to something that happened during your service. So a major thing is what you're trying to show is chronic. Basically, anything that's going on with you 6 months or more is considered a chronic issue. And you should definitely get diagnosed and checked if something's going on more than 6 months. But examples of it, veteran witnessed another soldier get shot in combat and now living with PTSD and thinking of it a lot, certainly happens. Veterans developing chronic ulcers that began during service because of the MREs and the food that we eat, even the stress from deployment. If he has records in service showing that he had this condition then, he has a shot at filing for it, because remember when you go through the MEP station and you go through all the little jumping jacks and all that fun stuff, they said you were fit for service, that there was nothing wrong with you. And now you have these conditions. So that's how you're trying to say that it's due to service. Next slide. Number 2, aggravation. A veteran can be compensated for disability which began before entering into active duty but was made worse than it would have been if they didn't join the military. So that's the idea of you played sports as a kid, hurt your knee, and then you go and join the military, and for whatever reason you wanted to be infantry and go airborne. You pass basic training like it's nothing. You pass your AIT training or your individual training like it's nothing. But 4 years in, you have a bad jump and you hurt your knee. Now you could argue that the military made it worse. The presumption of soundness is basically what I was talking about when you go to the MEP station and they say, this person is fit for service. And now that you are documented as being healthy at this point in time when having no issues, and now a few years later you have these issues, where did they come from? And so the only way the VA could argue this is if they have clear and unmistakable evidence. Let's say you didn't mention the fact that you had asthma when you joined, and now you're trying to file for an asthma claim and they get records that you had asthma when you're 10 years old and all the way through high school. That's going to get knocked out. Next slide. Secondary disabilities. So any disability that is caused or aggravated by another service-connected disability can be compensationable. So that is basic ones. I would say ringing in the ears can cause headaches. Because of PTSD and medication, a lot of people grind their teeth or have hyperhidrosis, which is excessive sweating, especially at night when they're sleeping. Because of your lower back, you have bad knee problems or even bad nerves. So you have femoral nerves and what is the other nerve? I forgot the other nerve right now. But you have 2 femoral nerves. Ooh, I forgot. But you got 2 major nerves going down your leg that you could argue your lower back is pinching and causing little lightning bolts where you're getting sciatic type issues. And those could be secondary things. When it comes to secondaries, I really think this is your high potential of getting the high percentages in the grand scheme of the overall. So you should always look into secondaries. Next slide. Presumption. So some diseases can be presumptively service-connected if the veteran shows evidence that the disease appeared within a certain time frame after service. So Agent Orange is a very common one. Contaminated water in Camp Lejeune is a common one. There's a few places, you know, the Fukushima fire, nuclear power plant in Japan, if anybody was over in that area at the time. Those could be considered presumptive conditions if you get diagnosed with one of these things that the VA agrees to. And they have a list of conditions that they believe. Next slide. So presumptive conditions, chronic diseases, tropical diseases, prisoner of war conditions, the Persian War, radiation exposure, and mustard gas exposure. And that's actually a thing I've seen with Gulf War vets. Very rare, but some guys that went into the Gulf War are service connected for gas exposure. Next slide. Illnesses that can't be service connected. You have medical records in service showing that you had the flu, that you got food poisoning, but they resolved, you know, it's just little things like that. They're not going to work. Developmental defects. You can't really claim ADD as a mental condition that I've seen so far. Things like that. Injuries which are either immediate or they're willful misconduct, yeah. So as long as you didn't do anything stupid, you know, if you try to fight an MP and he tackled you and you got stitches over your eyebrow, you're probably not going to be able to claim that. Any disability or death solely due to the result of the veteran's use of tobacco products. Yeah, so they changed that a little while ago, but they used to actually grant stuff like that. But now they don't do it anymore. It's a waste of time to even argue. Even though a lot of vets smoke cigarettes because of service or because of stress of service, not going to work. Next slide. Injuries resulting from VA medical care. So things that happen in the current injury, disability, or death resulting from VA medical care or VOC rehab or the compensation work therapy or CWT. Those you could claim 1151s, but I always tell people you're probably better off talking to an attorney than a VSO most of the time. The major thing when it comes to this, it's like a tort claim, and arguing medical malpractice is very, very hard. But sometimes things are very, very obvious when they make it super bad errors. But the big thing you got to worry about here is that there is a time limit. I believe it's only 2 years. So you have 2 years to file for this thing or it's too bad. But when it comes to tort claims or VA medical causing injury and things like that, most of the time you're better off talking to an attorney. Next slide. No in-service injury must be proven. So hearing loss. So there are a few things that they kind of just are givens. If you're working on a flight line, you're infantry and you're airborne, you're doing artillery, they'll say there's a likelihood you're going to have hearing loss because of your background. Asbestos related diseases, say you're in the Navy and you're working on old Navy buildings, old Navy ships, there's a high likelihood you're going to run into asbestos. Hepatitis C, that's a big one when it comes to blood transfusions, or for some of our older vets, the air gun shots that they thought blood couldn't get transfused through. A lot of guys got hepatitis C through the air gun shots. So when it comes to hearing loss, you got to show that it it's actually kind of severe. And what the major thing that the VA is looking for is your word association. If you miss the words, you have a higher likelihood of getting a higher percent. Most of the time you're looking at a 10% for hearing loss, unless it's really bad. I met a sniper one time that had severe hearing loss. But yeah, you don't want a high percentage for that. Next slide. So benefit of doubt. The whole reason you're building your records up and getting doctor's letters and trying to get all the support of saying this is why it's due to service is what you're trying to show is there a 51% chance that this veteran is being truthful and this thing is due to service? So they're going to review all the records and everything you gave them and review the records they have and see what works. And if there's a 51% shot, they're supposed to give it to the veteran and grant it. So anytime you get denied and you're like, I gave them all the records, I can't believe they would deny this, what the hell? When you file your appeal, argue benefit of doubt. If you don't have records, kind of harder, but that's why you want to build your records up the best you can. Treat it like you're going to court. When you file your claim, think about how you would say no to yourself. And when you think, how can I say no to this person? Look at all these records, look at all this evidence. You should have good odds. Next slide. So in review, the major thing you want to show is that you're a veteran to be able to file for veteran disability benefits. For service connection, always remember you want to show that you're currently diagnosed for this condition that you're filing for, and that you could show an in-service event or diagnosis that ties your current condition to your service now. When you're trying to tie this condition to your military service, what you're trying to argue are 4 basic ideas. Directly due to service, it was aggravated due to service, it's secondary to something they're already paying me for, or it's a presumptive condition because of some kind of VA rule that they've agreed to, like the Agent Orange. The 5th one, of course, is the VA medical care. If they did some type of malpractice on you, which hopefully they don't. And the conditions that cannot be service connected for the major thing are the ones that you did to yourself, being drunk, being dumb. Next slide. All right, so this is the easy part. I could try to answer any of your guys' questions and figure out what we got to do, and hopefully I can make a better understanding of it all.
All right, Joe, we're going to go ahead and answer some of the questions that have already come through on the chat and in the Q&A box. So if you all listening have any questions, please feel free to go to the Q&A box and ask your questions there so that Joe will be able to give you any answers. So one of the first questions that we received from Jose Rico: if I was seen in the past several months of ailments that were not initially recorded, separated in 2016, how do I notify the VA to reconsider my new health issue that I am receiving meds for?
To reconsider it, what you want to show is those current records and try to get a doctor's letter saying that it's due to your service. So when you get denied, don't get angry and throw the letter away. Review at why they denied it. And most of the time they'll say something like, you're not currently diagnosed, there's no in-service records, something like that. Your best way to get around it is a doctor's letter. And it could literally be any doctor. As long as it's the doctor saying, I think so, that's your benefit of doubt. And once you do that, then you would file a supplemental claim form. It's a 20-0995 form, and you would attach your current medical records and doctor's letter to that.
All right, we have another question. It says, does a veteran need to be deployed in combat zone to apply or qualify for PTSD disability rating?
Absolutely not. PTSD really isn't about combat. It's about a stressful incident. So let's say you were going home for Christmas and you had 2 weeks off, but you're still active. You're an active duty member, you're just taking 2 weeks vacation. You go to town with your family and a drunk driver hits your cousin in the middle of the street and your cousin dies. You could argue that that event caused PTSD, and that was due to your service. Another one that I know is a veteran was on the Autobahn in Germany, wasn't driving, but got in a wreck, and a few of his friends that were in the car passed. And that's PTSD, even though it's not combat, it wasn't in Afghanistan. But you still want to get diagnosed.
The next question comes from Bob Park. He says, I filed for Agent Orange disability, prostate cancer in 1997 and was granted a 20% disability. In 2009, I filed for an additional Agent Orange disability due to kidney cancer and was denied, even though my doctor certified that the cancer was related to Agent Orange. Does the VA still turn down kidney cancer claims for Agent Orange?
I believe they do. Let me check. I still think they deny it. But when it comes to your doctor backing you up, if that doctor's letter is using medical journals and things like that, instead of, like, our basic idea when you get a doctor's letter is just saying, I believe that it's more likely than not due to service. But when it comes to something like this, because this condition isn't a part of the Agent Orange list, you would want that doctor to cite medical journals and scientific facts of saying, this is why I think this. And more than likely, you're probably going to have to file an appeal to see a judge. And then you'd probably have a shot at it, because even though it's not necessarily on the list now, it could be if you keep fighting it. It would just be a pain because it's going to take a while. But the reason you see that Agent Orange list grow throughout the years is because of veterans that kept fighting and kept appealing their claims. But I think it would depend on the doctor's letter, and I think I would just appeal it and keep fighting it, especially if you think it's due to Agent Orange.
Our next question is, how is the timeline in service connections different for reservists than are on and off active duty throughout the years?
So the VA will pick on the Guard and the Reserve more than anybody else. And I think at the end of the day, the VA looks at the Guard and Reserve as states, like state representatives, where the active military is for the country. Because if you get injured in the reserves or the Guard and you don't have a line of duty order or the LOD forms or something showing that you got injured during active time, the VA's got to pick on you like all hell. And so I always tell my guys that are in the Guard and the Reserve, try to get line of duty order. Try to make sure these things are in your record. Because I had one guy that injured his knee and they took him straight to a hospital that was in town. And he had surgery the very next day. One of the drivers that took him to the hospital was actually the medic and his first sergeant. And so we had very, very solid letters from people that served with them saying that this happened during an active event, and the VA kept denying the guy because there wasn't a line of duty. And so if you're in the Guard or the Reserve, make sure you get line of duty orders. Make sure it's in your medical record saying that it happened during active time, or they're going to pick on you. I don't know why they pick on you more than most, but they do.
Our next question is from Martin. Can I request a better copy of my medical record? I received a copy when I was discharged, but a lot of pages were faded.
Hopefully. It all depends on the copies they have. But when you're ordering your records, your first step would probably be going to archives.gov. Or if you go on Google, you could type in SF-180. And that's the actual form to request your medical records or your unit records while you're serving. And on the last page, it'll tell you where to send it because there's separate areas for most of us where your medical and your unit records are kept. But archives.gov or SF-180 form, and I'll be able to get your records.
This next question comes from Macy. How do you request your service records, both medical and activities?
Same thing, the SF-180 form or archives.gov. And normally they should get it to you. Sometimes if you filed a claim with the VA might actually have a copy of your records at the federal building. They might kind of get a little grumpy about having to go get them, but they could get them for you.
This is from Benjamin. I have 70% for PTSD, but I have not been being treated for it. How do I get an increase to 100%?
You definitely do not want to file for an increase until you have medical records showing the severity of it, because what they're going to do is try to say that you're better and try to lower you. Another thing you would want to look into for the PTSD being so high are secondary issues because of PTSD. And if you're taking medication, that'll certainly help secondary issues that you're trying to claim for PTSD. But your number one thing to try to get a higher percentage is getting current medical records showing the severity of it. There is a massive jump from 70 to 100. So it all kind of depends on your background and the severity of the condition. But 70 for the most part is pretty safe for most of us. So you want to be careful before you try to file an increase on that.
Okay, the next is, can you explain permanent and total disability? Are you required to be reevaluated every 5 years?
Not after you're permanent and total. So there's some conditions that the VA will grant, but they think you're going to get better. And it's usually the subjective things, like how severe is your mental condition? How severe are your headaches? Or how severe is your knee or your back? The things that maybe you have a good day, maybe you have a bad day, but they're hard to kind of really judge. And so if you're not permanent and total, especially if you get a decision letter and it says, we granted 40% for your lower back, we believe this condition could get better, so we're going to reevaluate you in the future, that is a massive heads up that they're going to reevaluate you. So you definitely want to keep going to the doctor and having records showing that that condition isn't getting better, or they're going to try and more than likely deny you if you don't have any current records. But normally after 5 years, they kind of leave you alone. They still have some potential to mess with you. 10 years, you're pretty solid that they're not going to mess with you anymore. And 20 years, they absolutely won't mess with you unless there's some type of fraud. Normally, when you see permanent and total on disability claims, it's because of your overall conditions or because of the severity of one condition. So sometimes you'll see people that'll get permanent and total for PTSD right off the bat, and they only filed maybe a year ago. That's because of the severity of their records. But some people will get permanent total after filing for 10, 15 years of getting a 20 here and then a 40 here and then a 50 and slowly building up till eventually they finally hit the 100%, but they have so many conditions that they'll just leave you alone and say you're permanent total.
This next question is from Andrea. I already received 20% from a service-related condition, and I am needing surgery for the same issue. When would be the best time to submit for a possible increase, now or before the surgery? This condition is greatly impacting my life. Thank you.
Number one, in my opinion, I'd file it before surgery because that's when it's really affecting you and it's severe. Two, because you're already service connected for that condition, you have the potential to file for what they call temporary 100%. So even though you're only 20% for that condition, if you need more than a month to recover, you could get paid for 100% for that month that you need to recover. So what you want to do is get a letter from your doctor saying you're going to have surgery on this condition and it's going to happen on this date and it's going to take this much time to heal for you to get back to normal, and then file for the temporary 100% and the increase at the same time.
Next question is from Ron. What is the most common mistake made by veterans when filing for benefits? It's a two-parter. And why are some people in your position more successful at helping veterans get their rating?
I think it just depends on, when it comes to the service officer, I think it just kind of depends on personality. One, I think there's a part that the service officer needs to care. And the other part is they need to know how to do their job. Because even though they might be a very caring person, if they don't know how to do it properly, it might not work out. And if they know how to do their job, but they don't care, then they're probably worthless too. I think one of the big mistakes a lot of vets have when it comes to the VA is thinking, I'm an honorable vet, so they're going to take my word for it. And that doesn't really work. You really want to have the current records to show that something's affecting you still. And so I tell people it's about the proof more than your word. So you could write your personal statement and you have buddy statements, but it's really about the records. And so if you could show the severity of a condition and show how it's due to your service, you're going to have better odds. But I think a lot of vets, when they first file, think, I'm being honest, I should get it. And it doesn't really work that way.
So I have another one from Roxanne. It says, I filed for disability back in March 2020, and I called the VA and they said they were waiting for information from the National Archives. Probably May 2021 will be moving forward on my case. Is there anything I can do to speed things up?
Not really. When they use those dates, they're very generalized. They could move back and forth any which way. Like, they're really not set in stone at all. They just kind of throw something out there. When it comes to trying to speed it up, really your best bet of trying to speed it up is if you're currently homeless and you get a letter from a social worker, or if you're in hospice. But normally, more than that, you could always ask for them to speed it up, and hopefully they do. But most of the time they don't. Another chance you might have is talking to your congressman, especially if your congressman's decent. They sometimes could get the VA to move on certain issues.
Next, it says, I was previously receiving treatment at the VA for PTSD issues, but have not seen a therapist lately. Should I see the therapist again prior to filing a claim for PTSD?
Yeah, I mean, depending on how long ago, like if it was, you know, you quit going because of the coronavirus and you're like, yeah, I'm just gonna stay home, you could probably still file because I think that would be understandable why, you know, your records went dark for a while. But if it's been a few years, I would say talk to the doctor and start building those records up again and then file.
Chris says, I just went through the higher level review process and they decided that there were 7 different issues that was a duty to assist error. What does that entail exactly?
That could be a lot of things, but basically that the VA messed up on doing their part somewhere down the line. So it could be a bad medical exam, like say you file for a TBI claim and they send you to a medical examiner who's really more of a dermatologist than a brain doctor. You could kind of argue that that wasn't proper. Um, the VA didn't get all your military records in time. It could be a few things, but basically it's they made an error and so they need to review something on their end.
Another question is the VA now acknowledging burn pit side effects?
It's kind of in that kind of sort of area, like the undiagnosed Gulf War illness. Your best bet is one, getting diagnosed, and then two, getting the doctor's letter saying, I think it's because of this over here. Without it, you'll probably gonna have to fight them. But if you're trying to avoid the appeals process, you try to get a doctor that could back you up and saying this is likely due to this environment.
Marty says that my public health service records are lost. I've submitted 4-year-old medical records documenting chronic spine and vision conditions spanning 40 years from discharge. Can the VSO help through the disability process, or is an attorney specializing in this a better way to go?
A VSO could help you through the process, but when it comes to getting old medical records, most medical facilities destroy records after 10 years. So if you don't have any copies of those, it's going to be really hard. If you were seeing the same doctor for a while, then you might have a shot at getting a doctor to write a letter saying you've been my, you know, this guy's been my patient for the last 30 years and I've been treating him for this condition. I had a veteran that had a heart doctor for 30 years and the heart doctor wrote a letter to back that up. And so I think that would be your best bet there, but I don't know of any attorney that'd be able to figure out where destroyed records are. If you submitted them to the VA should have them, hopefully. Like if you did it in the past. But if you haven't got those records from the old medical facilities that you used to go to, they're probably destroyed by now if they're over 10 years old.
The next question comes from Patrick, and he says, how do disability payments combine with income from military pensions?
They shouldn't. So your VA disability and your VA retirement should be separated. They used to use the CRSC or combat related special monthly compensation or special compensation. But normally the easiest way around that is if you get to 50% disability through the VA or higher, then they automatically should separate the two. Because what they tried to do in the past is if you were under 50%, they attach it to your retirement pay so they could tax you. And so the major thing is try to hit that 50% rating and then have it split so they're not messing with you and you get both. But most of the time they shouldn't be messing with you.
The next question is, can you review the types of documents or evidence that substantiate non-combat PTSD claims?
I mean, yeah, you could review them, but if when it comes to, like, it all just depends on the story, you know, like, yeah, it comes down to what the records say. But yeah, you could always try to look at and see what's going on with it, and especially if you were active at this time when this thing happened, someone broke into your house because you're living in an apartment off base. I think that would be an argument for PTSD. So it kind of depends on the story, but yeah.
So we have a couple more questions. One of the last ones is, how or where can we get in contact with a VSO representative?
So where is my contact list? So I work for LA County, and I believe that number is, oh man, let me find it real quick.
And Joe, while you look for that number, I'll answer one of the questions that came in. Will this recording be available to view after the presentation? And we will go ahead and send this to all that have joined us tonight so you can review as well.
Where did you go? Yeah, so the phone number is 877-4LA-VETS, VETS. And so that's for the LA County. Easiest way to get a hold of me is my email. Right now I'm working from home and I'm getting a crazy amount of emails, but it's just my full name, josephjsapien@gmail.com. And you could always ask me questions and any ideas that you're trying to figure out, and I'll try to give you the best advice that I can. But yeah, I work for LA County, so our main hub is the Bob Hope Patriotic Hall off of Figueroa Street. And that would probably be the main contact right there. And they would branch you out to whoever VSO is closest to you. DAV is another good group. American Legion's a really good group. Jewish War Vets is a good group. And you don't have to be a part of their chapters, so you don't have to be Jewish to go to a Jewish War Vet service officer. You don't have to be a disabled American vet to go to DAV. You don't have to have a Purple Heart to go to the Purple Heart guys. They're basically just names of the groups, but they help vets. So don't worry about if you don't fall under whatever the little title is.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for taking the time out to answer our questions. If there are any last questions, please feel free to place those in the Q&A or the chat box. Andrea says, bravo, thank you so much for this information.
Oh yeah, and if you have any questions, email me and I'll send you anything that I have and give you any ideas that I got. Never a problem. Try to figure something out.
And also, in addition to the recording, Joseph has provided a veterans resource book that will also go out to all of our attendees tonight.
Yeah. And then, yeah. And if you guys email me, I'll send you a link to my podcast too that talks about specific disability benefits. So just your back, just your knee. things like that. Kind of gives you an idea of what you're trying to do.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And we're going to invite Chris on back, and he's going to go ahead and help us close out the evening if there's no additional questions.
Thanks, Faith. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed tonight's program as much as I have. The USC Alumni Veterans Network hosts programming and events throughout the year, ranging from community service projects to informative presentations like tonight that appeal to Trojan veterans of all ages and interests. Please make sure you follow us on our Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at USC AVN to stay connected and learn about our upcoming event. Thanks again for joining us. Have a good night and always fight on.